Now, we've had quite a few references to numbers, to figures on the trade side, and I think many of those are really important. Certainly, the EU as a whole is a very significant trade partner for Kazakhstan. And I think you're perfectly right, in fact, in terms of building, the political level, the technical level, sort of relationship. And I think we're seeing a lot of good work on that, a lot of high level meetings, a lot of active sort of diplomacy, let's say. And certainly, trade with the EU is vital for Kazakhstan. The figures of around 40 billion euros trade turnover, or dollars perhaps, trade turnover last year is significant. 30% of Kazakhstan's sort of foreign trade. And I think that's not bad from an EU perspective. I think we can do better, and I think there's aspirations to achieve more. But I think that's not bad, given the geography of Kazakhstan. This is a country located, at the vortex of several major, probably dominant global economies like China. You've got the Gulf states, injecting a lot of capital into the sort of Central Asian and Kazakh economies at the moment. So the fact that the EU is there with this sort of figure, I think, is really good. I think it's really important also to highlight, and someone like myself who's been dealing with Kazakhstan since the 1990s, since 97 actually, my first visit to Kazakhstan. And in fact, I think as Luke Devine actually mentioned in the first panel, the EU has been a very strong supporter of the reforms taking place in Kazakhstan. I myself have witnessed how these reforms have evolved over a 3-decade-long period. And I think it's important to say that, the EU-driven initiatives sort of the time, such as the Transsector program under the EU-Kazakhstan sort of, technical assistance program. It's kind of the global gateway of the 1990s, if you like. It gave a lot of foundation, provide a lot of foundation for what we see today, these trade figures that I just mentioned sort of today. The End Child Treaty, with which I worked for a good 3, I worked there for 1 decade. It's been around for 3 decades. ECT's kind of winding down now. The EU countries are pulling out, and Kazakhstan is actually staying in, which I think is great. But nevertheless, this is an EU-driven initiative to promote trade, investment in the energy sector. And I think a lot of the investment that has come in to Kazakhstan has been there because of the investment protection sort of instruments and guarantees that EU instruments such as the ECT has actually provided, because investors go into markets which are lucrative, attractive for their commercial returns, of course, but they also want stability. They also want legal security for their investment. So I think the EU's played a very significant role in creating these investment frameworks for countries like Kazakhstan. And I think, Kazakhstan's responded very positively. It is, in many ways, if you look at the EBRD and, various IFIs and literatures, it is one of the kind of the benchmark reformers. I remember in the 1990s in the FT, it was actually referred to as the first Central Asian tiger, attracting investment on par with the East Asian sort of countries, which the president at the time, Nazarbayev, very actively, sort of drew upon that. Now, just to kind of, go speed through some of the messages I want to share with you here today. The word oil is not the favorite word of this house. In this world in which we live today, when we strive towards, legitimately towards sustainability, towards, climate change mitigation, oil is not our best friend. But nevertheless, we do need to understand, and Thomas and Alberto had mentioned earlier, that this has been a baseline story, both for a Kazakhstan-EU relationship, because so many significant European players have entered the Kazakh sort of energy market, oil market, over these decades. But this has contributed substantially to Kazakhstan's development. I think last year or the year before, there was around about $18 billion that was put in, into the Kazakh oil fund and into infrastructural development of the country, health services. This is a bedrock of stability. It's a bit of a Gulf states model, but I think, historically, we have to acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with that. And I think the key issue now is that Kazakhstan has made a clear policy choice, and that choice is to embrace the energy transition, okay, to accelerate the energy transition, and to strive towards carbon neutrality. So, in this context, there is a massive opportunity for the EU to work with Kazakhstan. This is a country that's committed itself at a political level, at international agreements level, to move its economy from grey to green, to move its society towards sustainability. So this is a very substantial opportunity. It is no less a challenge than it is an opportunity, because if you look at the figures today, Kazakhstan produces something like around 67% of its electricity from coal-generated power stations, and around about 20% from gas. So, you're looking at around about upper 80s in percentage-wise. But there is a clear target set by the government to move to about 25% of power generation from renewable sources by 2030. Yeah, which is around the corner. 5 years, it's going to go very quickly. My kids are growing up very fast, and I'm sure many of yours are as well. So, 5 years is a short time. It's a very ambitious target. It's a great target to strive towards. But this is really where the EU can help, can support, can work with Kazakhstan, and indeed, I see our brotherly Central Asian ambassadors with your countries as well. And what really is needed here, I want to be very clear, there's plenty of money in Kazakhstan. This is no longer the 1990s when you had a capital deficit sort of country. There's money in the region. What we need here is technology. We need technology. We need know-how. We need quality technical assistance. Still to train bureaucrats, to train staff and energy company stakeholders how to implement, how to use capital wisely, how to share experience. What the EU did in terms of, some of these power purchasing agreements, which didn't work out in terms of market design. We could go into that. But I think, in terms of electricity generation, Kazakhstan is certainly going to see a demand of electricity generation. There's already some level of, shortfalls in supply. A lot of the new generation capacity is going to come from renewables, and this is a major opportunity for the EU. And I personally, as kind of an energy expert, and we discuss this in the Brussels Energy Club, my message to EU sort of colleagues is to work as an enabler, be an enabler. The money is not going to come from the public sector. The money is going to come from private capital, from all kinds of, financial instruments. We've got, the carbon market space, and climate finance is going to be a big part of the discussion on how to, finance the energy transition in the future. President Tokayev mentioned very clearly in his State of the Union address last year that carbon finance, carbon markets, carbon trading is going to play a major role in financing Kazakhstan's transition to renewables, financing Kazakhstan's sort of, climate change mitigation efforts and obligations under the Paris agreements, particularly Article 6.4, which is all about, going beyond the voluntary and into much more structural arrangements. So I think, there is a lot there for the EU to work with. The EU has this ETS, emission trading sort of scheme, which has been going for quite a while. Kazakhstan has, of course, adopted its own scheme, but it's a work in progress. And this is where we need quality technical assistance to actually share experience, to train, and, to act as an enabler. Like I said, we have seen a fair amount of investment in renewables into Kazakhstan, but to be honest with you, the figures that I'm looking at, compared to what has been received and what is required, it's peanuts what has been received. I've got a figure here of about 1.5 billion sort of euros into renewables. You're going to need hundreds of billions of euros into Kazakhstan's kind of green energy transformation. So I think I'm abusing my privilege here a little bit. I just want to mention very briefly two things: green hydrogen and nuclear. So I think, from my perspective, we are still learning a lot about, hydrogen, its potential to contribute to the energy transition. There's, of course, there's a lot of, wind about. There's a lot of discussion about green hydrogen sort of today. And in fact, speaking of wind, there's a German-Swedish company, Sweden. These are good people. These are friends of Kazakhstan investing quite a lot in Kazakhstan. But I think the jury's still out. We're still yet to see how all of this is going to play out. Hydrogen today is kind of where renewables were maybe a good 15 years ago. I've been in Brussels for 16 years now, so I can make a comparison in this context. But I think, we're seeing, I think, a lot of policy level support from Kazakhstan. There's kind of memberships of some of these international alliances on hydrogen. We're also seeing some cooperation with, the regional brotherly states of Central Asia. So I think it's a work in progress, but it's an area where we will see both more cooperation, but also more opportunity to work with European, let's say, partners. Nuclear, Alberto, yes, you did allude to this, and you're perfectly right. Look, this is actually a facet of Kazakhstan's democracy, and the fact that it is a significant democratizer, and in fact, standard setter in governance sort of ecosystems in Eurasia, I would say. But yes, 6th of October, watch the country, watch the referendum. There will be a referendum on deciding whether the country moves forward with a nuclear power plant. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about this in Kazakhstan. By the way, it's not a new story. Prospects of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, electricity generation in Kazakhstan has been discussed for around about 20 years. But I think now it's really accelerated, because I think Kazakhstan is in some ways a benefactor of the current, wider relationship with the EU and China, EU and Russia. People mentioned geopolitics before, so I think Central Asia's become increasingly fashionable, and for the right reasons. I think the CRM story is a hugely important story in terms of mitigating our dependency on other sort of countries. I won't, point any fingers here. I'm not into blame games, but I think, there is very strong. The polls, I think, are suggesting at the moment that the kind of supporting the adoption, let's say, passing the referendum and introducing nuclear power in Kazakhstan is in a strong position. We will find out this coming Sunday, in fact, the results of that. But there is, I should say, still a lot of skepticism, a lot of opposition. Kazakhstan, like, French Pacific territories, was used as a nuclear testing sort of site during Soviet era. So this still resonates, with segments of the population. So, there is a healthy debate. I think that's a great facet of Kazakhstan's sort of democracy in this position.